Capturing fast-paced, dramatic action is one of the most exciting parts of photography. Those split-second moments are just pure magic. But I also love the quiet beauty of a perfectly composed portrait. The big challenge is that the settings for high-speed action and great image quality portraits are basically the opposite. We don't always have the luxury to know what our subjects will do next or the time in the field to dial in the perfect settings. And if we're stuck fumbling through the menus or trying to change the modes on our camera, chances are we will miss the moment altogether. What we need is the ability to instantly change between completely different settings, so we always have the right ones dialed in no matter what is happening in front of us. You might not realize it, but whether you're shooting Canon, Nikon or Sony, your cameras already have that superpower built in, you just need to unlock it. In today's video, I'll show you how to access and set up this hidden feature and supercharge your camera so you will be ready for anything. I'm Wegener, and for over 20 years, I've been a professional photographer capturing unique bird photos and videos and teaching all of you to create your own masterpieces. Ever since our cameras have gotten crazy high frame rates, 20, 30, 40, or even 120 frames per second like this A9 III, I've started to focus more and more on fast-paced action photography. There's simply something magical about capturing these fleeting moments. But as you know, when it comes to freezing this fast action, we need to shoot at very high shutter speeds and in return also have to use very high ISO levels. The problem is that oftentimes birds make the best pose for a portrait right after landing or before taking off. And in the past, I was never able to properly capture these moments because I either had my action settings already dialed in and ended up with a noisy, low image quality portrait, or I changed my settings over and then the bird would suddenly take off, for instance, and I ended up with a blurry action shot. Now, the concept of an emergency action button isn't completely new, but that's not really what I needed. For instance, when I have two birds sitting right in front of me, I always have a high shutter speed dialed in, just in case one of the birds might do something crazy. What I actually needed was a high image quality button that I could just press and hold and then instantly revert back to my fast shooting settings. Whether you want an emergency action or high image quality button is totally up to you and your shooting style. Personally, I feel like a high image quality button actually makes more sense. For instance, a rifle bird may sit in front of you for 20 or 30 minutes doing nothing, only to then suddenly rip up his wings and give you an amazing display. And in a situation like this, I like to be ready for the action moment, having my fast-paced action settings dialed in, and only if I want to take a high-quality photo of the bird perched, I quickly press my high image quality button, take a few shots, and then instantly revert back to my action settings, ready for that crucial moment. This way, I feel like I got the highest amount of great quality images and also missed the least amount of photos. Unfortunately, this feature is not available on all camera bodies, and you might have to check with your manual to see if it's available on yours. The good news is that for Canon and Sony, it's available on most mid-level and pro bodies, whereas I think on Nikon it's only available on the Z8 and the Z9. What you have to be aware of, especially for Canon, is that we cannot assign this function to whatever button we want, and only certain buttons will actually show us this function in the menu. So if it's not showing up on your old R5 camera, for instance, it's likely because you want to assign it to a button that doesn't support this function. The three buttons on Canon that definitely support it, for instance, is the AF point button, the AE lock or star button, and the AF on button. And the function that we actually want to assign to one of our buttons on the camera is called register and recall shooting functions on Canon, recall shooting functions on Nikon, and recall custom hold on Sony. Before I show you how to set it up for each brand, let's first look at the settings that we want to dial in. And the idea here is that we find a group of settings that works every single time when we press the button. And if you want to learn how to set up your camera to perfection, I've also linked many different camera setup guides for you down there in the description. So what I dial in for all the three brands is manual mode, so we can set up the aperture and our shutter speed. If we set up an emergency action button, I like to use a shutter speed of 1/3200th of a second. And for a high image quality button, I choose a 400th of a second. Next, we want to set up auto ISO, so the camera selects our exposure for us. From there, I also want to set up whole area, wide area, or full area tracking, where your camera tracks your subject all over the viewfinder for you, because that will be the quickest way to get onto your subject. Now, if you feel like your camera struggles with the whole area tracking, you could also assign a larger zone, but I wouldn't assign, for instance, spot autofocus because it might be too hard to get that tiny autofocusing field onto your subject really quickly. After that, I also like to dial in servo or continuous autofocus tracking, so in case my subject moves, I can still stay on it. And after that, I like to set up obviously eye tracking autofocus so the camera jumps right onto the bird's eye. Now there's a few more tweaks here and there that you can make, but these are the foundational ones that I want to set up for every single camera body. What you will notice when we go into these sub-menus now is that there's option to tick or untick every single item. And the idea is if we tick something and hold down the button, the camera will override any other setting we've set up previously in the camera and use the ticked setting. Whereas if we leave something unticked, the camera will default to what is set up in the rest of the menu. So let's set up this function first for Canon, and then I'll show you how to do it for Nikon and Sony. If you have an older style body with the old menu like an R5 or an R6 Mark II, you actually have to go to the orange menu and then tap number 3 and customize buttons to be able to assign something different to these custom buttons in the back. Whereas if you have an R5 Mark II or an R1 with the newer style menu, you will actually have to go to the green menu, tap number 1 and then go to customize buttons for shooting, and in there we can assign these rear buttons. Because I like to use double back button autofocusing on all my cameras, the AF on button and the star button is already taken. The star button I use for my base autofocusing mode to spot autofocus, and the AF on button I use for the animal eye tracking. So for me, the best button that's remaining on Canon bodies is actually the AF point selection button on the far right of the camera body. And I like this button because it's still easy to reach with my thumb, and I can hold it down for longer periods of time without hurting my finger as well. So in my case, this is the ideal third button. I'll show you this setup now on the R5 Mark II, but it's basically the same for all other Canon bodies, except that the newer cameras have a few more options in the menu. So first we go to the green menu, tap 1, and then go to customize buttons for shooting. And in there we scroll down on the left hand side until we get to the AF point button. You can see in my case I've already assigned a register recall shooting function here, but what you have to do is actually select the button, click OK, and then in this massive sub-menu, go all the way down somewhere in the middle to where it says register recall shooting function. But then we don't want to confirm, because now what we have to do is to press info to be able to dial in the sub settings that we need. And that opens up the sub menu where we can now put in all our settings. And as you can see, I've set it up as a high image quality button. So our shooting mode is manual mode. I've assigned a shutter speed of a 400th of a second. And I set the aperture to f5.6 because I want to stop down a little bit to get a bit more depth of field, sharpness and details on my subject when I'm shooting in my high image quality mode. And even if you have a lens that is slower, for instance f7.1 wide open, the camera will automatically then default to whatever is the most wide open on your camera. Then, very important, we set the ISO to auto. The metering mode I've left to evaluative metering, but this is actually something we could also untick because then we can set it directly in the main camera menu, or you can set it to something like center weighted or spot metering or highlight priority metering if you think that you're dealing with a lot of bright subjects and a dark background, so you're not blowing out those bright subjects. Exposure compensation is another thing that I've left untouched here because I don't know in what situation I'm going to find myself in, and so usually leaving it on 0 should give me a decent enough result. Then I set my white balance to a custom white balance of 5400 Kelvin. For my autofocusing area, I chose the whole area autofocus tracking where the camera tracks it all over my viewfinder. Then of course I have the whole area tracking servo on as well, so the camera tracks it all over the viewfinder. And then I set my subject to detect to animal. In my eye detection I set to auto. And then when it comes to the autofocusing characteristics here, you can decide, do you want to untick the boxes so it defaults back to what you set up in the pink menu, or do you want to put it in a specific mode here? And because I feel like the R5 Mark II works best on the auto +1 setting for portraits, I've ticked both here and dialed it in. And the last items you could either leave unticked again, or for instance, I can go in and also select here the release priority for the servo. Of course, we want the autofocus to be on. And I also want the autofocusing start position to be from my current autofocusing fields. And if we dialed in our settings, we need to go menu to go back and then press OK to select the register recall shooting function. And then we have it dialed in on our camera. And whenever we press the AF point selection button now, it will default to the settings we've dialed in. A 400th of a second with auto ISO and f5.6. And if you don't only want to set up your camera to perfection, but also get the best out of your RAW files, I would highly recommend that you check out my Lightroom and next generation Photoshop masterclasses. In my classes, I teach you step by step and in easy to follow chapters the tools and techniques you need to know to edit all your RAW images, even the most difficult ones, with ease. And of course, you won't just be watching, because I'm also providing you with my own raw file so you can edit right alongside me. And if you're not sure if my classes are worth it or the right fit for you, check out the amazing reviews that I receive on a daily basis from many happy students who I've helped to transform their editing lives, who now get great results with ease and actually enjoy the editing process. So if you want to turn your time in front of the computer from a frustrating chore where you don't really know where to start or what sliders to pull into a rewarding experience where you have an easy to follow workflow that you can apply to all your raw files and get great results every time, make sure to check out my Lightroom and Next Generation Photoshop classes down there in the description. I know they will help you a lot. On Sony, this setup is actually quite similar. First of all, we have to go to the yellow setup menu at the bottom, and then go to point 3 Operation Customize, and then select Custom Key Dial Settings for Photo. And in this submenu, I like to go to the rear one and then go to the Movie Record button and assign our function to that button. Because on Sony bodies, the video record button in stills mode is basically useless anyways, because if you press it, it just records in some weird default setting and not in our proper video settings. If we want to shoot video on Sony, we have to switch over to video anyways. So assigning this button in photo mode to something else makes perfect sense, and it's nice and easy to reach on the A9 III here, for instance, as well. So to assign this function to the movie button, we go to the rear one custom menu, go to number 3 movie button, and in my case you see I've already assigned it, but in your case it's probably not assigned, so you will have to select this, and then find in this menu the Recall Custom Hold 1, and it sits in the red shooting menu in the 4th tab. So we go to Recall Custom Hold, and then we press Select OK again. And now we basically have the same options available that we also had available for Canon. Our shooting mode obviously needs to be manual exposure again. Aperture I like to set to f5.6 so I can slightly stop down in most lenses. I want my shutter speed to be a 400th of a second. I want my drive mode to be continuous shooting, obviously. Then I don't have any boost speed activated because I just want the camera to default to whatever boost speed I've dialed in if I press the speed boost button in front of the camera. Exposure compensation I also left unticked because I don't think I need it here. ISO, very important, I've set to auto. Metering mode I've set to multi, but you could also select highlight priority, for instance. Focus mode I've selected continuous autofocusing. Focus area I choose wide. And then we have 3 autofocusing options left. First of all, you will notice we can't actually select the subject to detect. It will just default to whatever we've selected in the main menu. Then of course we want to tick AF on so the autofocusing is working. And then the other 2 options we could probably leave unticked as well, because then it will also default to what we've set up in the menu. In my case, I can also tack it and I just set it to the standard settings. And then all we need to do is click register, and that will register these settings. And then we have it dialed in for Sony. So whenever we press the movie record button in photo mode now, it will default to these settings and give us a nice high image quality option. Let's do the same for Nikon. And here, my only issue is that we kind of have a lack of buttons on the back of the camera bodies. We just have the AF on button in the rear, the display button, and then we also have the front function buttons. So we kind of have to decide what autofocusing modes we want to assign to which button. I usually have the whole or full area tracking assigned to the AF on button where the camera tracks the subject all over the viewfinder for me. And then I had usually assigned the spot autofocus to the front function button 1 and the 3D tracking to the display button. Now I would probably make some changes to install our new function here, and I would either assign it to the display button or to one of the front function buttons. In our case, let's just assign it to the display button because I think it's the easiest to reach and hold for most people. So to assign this mode for Nikon, we need to go to the custom shooting menu and then go to F, the controls, and then F2, the custom controls for shooting. And in there, we go all the way down until we see on the right hand side, the display button. And here we click OK, and that opens up the sub-menu for the display button. And here we go through all the different options until we find the recall shooting functions. You see just below there's an option that has the same name, but it says hold, and this is not what we want to select. We want to select the function that is just called recall shooting functions, because that function is the one that allows us to press the button, and when we let it go, it will instantly revert back to our old settings, which is exactly what we want. So now we select that option. And in there you can see the options that are very similar to Canon and Sony that we've already set up, where we dial in all our settings and untick the ones that we don't need. So in here, to set up my high image quality button, I go into manual mode again, set the shutter speed of a 400th of a second, set my aperture to probably f5.6. Then I'll leave my exposure compensation unticked. And the ISO sensitivity setting, we need to make sure that we set it to auto ISO. The metering we could also leave unticked or set to our preferred metering. For instance, we could select the highlight priority here, or we could also go and set just the normal multi-metering. On Nikon, I often use the auto white balance and set to warmer, which usually gives me good results. So we can select this here or leave it unticked, then it defaults to what we've already set up in the main menu. From there, I make sure that I set my area mode to full area autofocus tracking so the camera tracks it all over the viewfinder. I set up my subject to detect to birds if available, otherwise I would select animals. And then I select the focus settings with lock-on settings, but I could also leave it unticked and it would default to what I've set up already. And then I just make sure that I have my AF on settings to on, so the autofocus works. And then here we could also decide, do we want to shoot at the full 20 frames per second or at lower frames per second. And then we also just need to press menu. That brings us back to the main menu, and we have dialed in our custom shooting functions for Nikon now as well. So whenever we hold down the display button now, it will revert back to our high image quality settings. And I think setting up our cameras this way with dialing in fast-paced action settings as our base settings and then creating a high image quality emergency button is actually the best of both worlds. We're always ready to shoot action, and if we want to take a portrait, we can press that button and get a nice, beautiful high image quality portrait. Would you agree? Is that how you set up your camera? Have you set it up completely different? Make sure to let me know in the comments. Also give me a thumbs up for the video, check out my channel membership and my masterclasses, and of course, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in another video very soon. Bye!